You wanted to talk about how you came to discovering the website His Holy Church and preparingyou.com, uh, and your journey up to
Yeah, I
that.
thought,
Go ahead.
yeah, I thought that might be a good starting point. Um, so, well, I guess you got to go right back, um, because I've always been quite questioning when I was young. I just wanted to know what the score was, which of course school was never going to provide. Um, so, struggled along with that. When I was 16, I actually got into early British punk, and there was Anarchy in the UK, Sex Pistols, and for some reason in my very small country high school, someone had put a book on Anarchy, so I read that and was like, "Yep, I got that. That simple principle's always stuck with me since." Um, but I'm not a Christian and never was. I never really liked it, um, but always wanted to know the truth. Uh, and so, after university, and one important thing I did was doing philosophy 101, and just although as a whole it wasn't that interesting, the best part was looking at, how do you know what you know? Why? Because you can see it, taste it, feel it, but people have illusions and, what do you call it? It's not the right word, but yeah. So you don't really know what you can know. You sort of get to Descartes, I think, beforehand. You can't, the doubter of that must be exist. And ever since then, I've always had that attitude like, well, no matter how likely you think something is, you don't know. You can only be quite sure, and you have to leave that gap to get out, which has stuck with me since. So um, I should add, in the time when I was about 19, I was starting to realise quite more soundly that the world wasn't as I thought it was. I had a moment where I can't even describe it. It was like clarity that we were in end times, and it was in my lifetime, and somehow that would involve me because I'd be around for it. But anyway, going on, live my life. Always been, looked at what was going on in the world. I doubted that moment, and but then I still researched it and looked into stuff, and the evidence seemed to be there that what was coming. Um, but in the last probably 7 or 8 years before things really hit the fan in 2020 or started to, I was quite had a mate. I was, I'd sort of gone in and out of this information because it can get depressing. Um, but then I had about 7 or 8 years when I was working in a job where I was driving around and I had a chance to listen to stuff all the time. And this was in the height of the YouTube era where you could actually get really decent recommendeds before everyone got banned. And I came across the information, which a lot of people probably do, uh, the so-called when people started looking into the birth certificate and supposed legal name for it and that sort of thing. And I looked into that a bit, which I found quite interesting. But you get into this sovereign set of stuff. You've talked about it, gurus. But I came increasingly to the conclusion this was far too complex. That you were like walking through a minefield, and sooner or later you're going to step on a mine. You're playing in somebody else's rigged game. Not a good idea. But with that in mind, for some reason something about the Essenes came up, and I found one of your articles, and I was trying to find more about the Essenes. Alison, it was Adventures in Language Land, I think it's called. And I explored your podcast a bit more. I started listening to your podcast, and as soon as I started listening to what you said, about contracts and stuff, I just went. To me, that was it. Bang! Like I thought you cracked the code of the Bible, which for me, I never dismissed, but I had been as far as like with zeitgeist falling into the hole. Like I think it's all maybe it's all just completely made up. Seemed to make sense, but I didn't dismiss it because I never could be 100% sure anything was right or wrong like that. And I had my own theories about like how we could have more direct. If you had to have a democracy, even though I don't believe in it, how you'd have to have. I even came up with the theory of 12s and representatives of 12 would become another 12. So very similar to like a lot of people theorizing how we could build a decent society. But you can only go so far on your own. And then when I came across your work, it was like um, I thought, yeah, it just filled in a lot of things. And suddenly I could start looking at that book, and actually some of it started making more sense than it did previously. Not that I'd been a huge reader of it. And then I took the really bizarre step when you kept going on about Join the Living Network. I thought, this is pretty. This is not the sort of thing I'd do I've ever done before. Send an email and end up getting on a phone call to Mark and Dan at that time in Australia, which was really odd, to say the least, to something called His Holy Church, coming from someone who really disliked Christianity. And I still do, to be honest. What is presented as Christianity.
Right.
So I now find myself in the really odd position where I've quite often quoting the Bible, which is not really me. But it's about truth to me.
Don't worry, nobody's going to understand what you mean when you quote the Bible. They're going to apply the definitions and ideas and ideologies that they have already accepted as true. And one of the biggest things, and I will turn it back to you in a second, but one of the biggest things on anybody's journey to find the truth is you have to be willing to admit that you don't have it now. You're not going to look for it if you think you've already got it. And, this is, that is a position of humility. As the word humility is defined, is that you're saying, I don't know, but I'd like to find out. I can't invent the truth. I have to discover the truth. And 90% of what we write is to try to help people set down what they've already accepted as true. I perfectly understand how you would be rejecting Christianity as it is presented today. I think Christ said many he would reject as workers of iniquity who say they're following him. That's his own words. He's telling you that 2,000 years ago. At least that's what they wrote down that he said. And so he rejected Christianity as it would be presented in later days. So, the fact is the journey, you're right, you don't know that what you know is true, but there comes a point where you're just going to act upon it. You're going to play whatever cards you have in your life based on what you believe is true. And you have to be willing all the time to say, oh my gosh, I was wrong about that. Or, you're always questioning yourself as much as obviously the world has you questioning it. But you also have to be willing to question yourself. The guy who thinks he knows it all, that's the guy, somebody was joining the network once and he said that, oh, by the way, I have a degree in theology. And I said, well, now you got me worried. Up to that point, I was saying, no, that's fine. He's telling me what he believed, fine. But then when he said he had a degree in theology, I said, now you have me worried, because you're going to have to let that go. And that's, of course, that's the whole story of Paul. He was the smartest guy, the Pharisee among Pharisees, and he had to let it all go. But anyway, back to your story. Can you give us a time frame while you were saying this? I can't really tell how old you are, and when you're saying you're making these discoveries, how old were you in relationship today? And go ahead.
My first realization is things that weren't what I thought they were. I was 19.
Okay.
And that original exposure, but that's a few decades ago. So in terms of you coming across your work, it's 4 years ago.
Okay.
And up until this year, I was obviously in a lot of conversation trying to understand it. But there was, I think, a moment this year I felt, I understand this well enough. I think it's time I start trying to talk about it to people with what's going on, and not that I understand it all, obviously, but the principles. And it's interesting when you actually go out to try and talk to people about it, you find that it hones what you're understanding as well.
Absolutely.
Hence the quoting and the paraphrasing. Often paraphrase things in the Bible. I don't always, because a lot of people, I talk to a lot of non-Christians, and a lot of them are, some of them are fine, and some of them are quite, what's the word for, almost traumatized by Christianity through experiences as children and stuff. So this year, I actually about 4 months ago. I started making videos and started trying to explain it in my way, um, and try to. There's a local group here that's based on not taking certain medical experiments. Um, I've met a lot of quite 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 decent people, quite intelligent, but it's such a shift, even for people who are quite open to take it from. Most people want to, when they listen to the way I see it, basically it's basically the principle of anarchism, how you actually make a society of it. Whereas most people, they like the concept of no ruler, but they don't really. There's no real model that they know of, and I didn't know any model that you actually has been tried and tested and actually worked. And for a lot of people, that shift is, which I actually found quite quick because I was already kind of been thinking like that for so long. But for a lot of people, it's a big shift. And so that's kind of where I'm at now, out there trying to explain it, improve my understanding, and dealing with the fact that this is very hard stuff to communicate, which I thought you sort of, because you'd say it, people would get it, but yeah. So.
No.
I don't really think that, but I didn't realize how hard it is to get from. It's like you have to understand it almost 100%. Not 100%. Like truth is like.
Even if you understood it 100%, I do not think people are going to get it. This is the conclusion that I've come to at this moment in time, is that nobody's going to get it unless it's coming from inside them. We're just pointing at incongruencies. This doesn't fit, that doesn't fit, but this could fit. We're looking, in the radio program we just did this weekend, I talked about you have a 150,000 piece puzzle in front of you that you call reality, but it's all mixed up. And you have to put the pieces together, and you clump all the blue ones together, all the green ones together, and then you start working on little bits and pieces of it, and you get a picture of part of reality. But you don't have the whole picture, and until you have the whole picture, you don't have the truth, which means you'll never probably have the truth. But that's wonderful, because this is why I say it's the journey that is the destination. This is why Christ didn't say jump into the kingdom. He said seek the kingdom. You're seeking an infinite kingdom, and it's an ongoing journey. Yes, when you find certain pieces that fit real well, yeah, cool. And that gives you incentive to go on from there. But no, other people, you cast your bread upon the waters and you hope they understand. You try to say it the best way you can for that individual, but it's up to them. And that's the only way it can work in a truly... Because you mentioned anarchistic society. That throws everybody off right away. Anarchistic society is a society in which there is no single arche, ruler. Yeah. But in a true anarchist society, there are thousands of rulers. You're ruling over you. I'm ruling over me. And Loudon's ruling over him. But can we come together without stepping on each other's toes? Liberty, the perfect law of liberty, is a dance. And the music's, that's one of the amazing things about music. You can hear music over here. Although you were talking about punk. I don't know there's a lot of melody in punk, but I come from a different era.
Early punk.
But they're
early British punk. A little bit more diverse.
We had jazz in the old days, and that was breaking all the rules, but yet there was a pattern there. And that's what a true anarchy is in order for it to be successful, you have to have the pattern. But that pattern comes from you and from me, and then we have to see if we can dance that dance without violating your rights. I have to care about your rights as much as I care about my own, which is exactly what Christ said, quoting Moses. These guys were creating free societies. You wouldn't know that looking at the modern version of the Old Testament, which is what you were seeing in the Sacrifice of Sophistry article, is that, all the modern Christians went to the Pharisees to say what the Old Testament mean, even though Christ said they got it wrong. So,
just sort of like now, I was thinking about this morning. He's probably dealing with the same situation with trying to say, no, you've got Moses wrong, just like we're trying to say, I think you've got the Christianity.
And the proof is in the pudding. Go ahead.
I was going to say a couple there. One I was going to say, I think truth is a bit like a mountain, like you going for a top that you'll never get to. But the closer you get to the top, no matter what angle you're coming from, you tend to be perhaps a little bit more in common with people coming from different paths. The other thing I'd add to your analogy with the puzzle, I would say, I think you're being generous saying it's 150,000 piece puzzle. I think it's 150,000 piece puzzle. No, but I'd say 150,000 piece puzzle, of which is probably about 20 million pieces, and you've got to figure out which 150,000 actually fit.
Okay.
Which makes it a little bit more complicated, because there's a lot of there's a lot of non-fitting puzzle pieces. But I agree. We've got to understand it, and I think. When I talk to people, I'll quote the Bible, but I don't start there necessarily at all. It just often comes in when I have to try to explain further concepts or explain to them it's been done before, which I think is a really critical thing, because I can talk all this stuff, but people need to understand that it has been done before, it's tried and tested, it's not just my invention, it's not just your invention, it's not probably the invention of any one person. It's something that we've had before and we can have again.
Right.
But what I mean about 100%, it's not so much you have to 100% get it, but it's this mental shift from what you've been trained and indoctrinated and programmed into, where you think you need some kind of rule and regulation, and that it's almost this is impossible, to shift to this idea that no, you actually can start bottom up with freedom.
Yeah, it's not called perfect law of liberty just as a catchphrase.
Yeah.
It actually, but it doesn't work if the person who is trying to implement the perfect law of liberty is selfish, where he thinks of his rights more than the next guy. And that's the dichotomy that stops most people. Because, I was just talking to people out there. We've had a dairy cow that had milk fever, and so all night long I've been going out and tipping the cow up because it goes down and it gets hard breathing, and I have to roll it back up, and we're trying to save its life. We've got it up on its feet. People are shocked that we even got it up on its feet. They thought it'd be dead by now. But like somebody had been out there, and I took the canvas that he had and laid it at my feet so I could kneel in the damp ground to hoist this cow. And I joked that, I wanted it because I didn't want to get my feet wet, and it's all about me, And everybody there, we've been up half the night, everybody laughs because that's really what the rest of the world is all about. I mean, their religion, they don't love Christ. They love the idea of Christ. But I can talk to a Buddhist the same way. I don't need Christ to tell you this. I could talk to somebody on the street and bring these things up. Of course, I've been practicing for years to talk about it, and that's that skill. But ultimately, when you talk to people, you have to really care about that person you're talking to, because you're not talking to their ears. You're not even really talking to their brain. You're talking to their soul. And in order to do that, you have to take a hard look at your soul, because you have to there's still stuff you haven't let go of. There's still stuff I haven't let go of.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah. It's the reality. You're walking
It comes back to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You start putting it out there, and then it comes back to you, and you've got to deal with it, or
yeah.
you're just going to fall over.
I'm a grandfather and great-grandfather, and the reality is, when we're having our children, I realized that, that's the seed you're casting out. It's coming back. If you screw up, it's coming back. If you are a hypocrite, your kids are going to see it. I say, man thinks he is wise. If a man thinks he is wise, let him marry. because his wife's going to show him that he isn't as smart as he thought he by her nature, and that's a good thing. But if he thinks he's patient, let him have children, because the children will test your patience. But the reality is, if you're going to have a society of free people, that's the next step. You have to get your family in order, but then you start trying to bring other people in. Everybody's going to be coming from a different place, a different point of view, and you have to realize the truth. I have my opinion, you have your opinion, but the truth is what we call God's opinion. But what it is it's reality. God's not sitting up, old man up there, thinking of things to make us do. It's built into whatever this creation is, whatever creative force is behind all this stuff. He built his character. We call it his character. I'm using somebody's pronouns. I don't know that he even has a pronoun. But
I don't even like the his male thing. I just go, where does that come from?
Yeah, well,
anyway,
if he made man and woman in his image, then God is neither male nor female. He's both.
Exactly.
So
beyond what we can conceive. It's something we can experience, but it's not something we can encompass.
I'm not going to try to draw a picture of God. Isn't that one of the commandments, that you're not supposed to create an image to represent God? But that's what everybody does. They do it with words. Let's come back to you for a minute. Loudon's been very patient. I don't know if he has much to say, but I don't want to spend 3 hours here, and we can always do this again. But let's put him on the hot seat and see if he has something he wants to add to this and get his voice in here, and then we'll just go around again. So, okay. What's up with? And now, Loudon, you're not in the same country as Darin.
That's correct. Yeah, I'm in Australia, and yeah, Darin speaks really well. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to speak as well as him, but I'll give it a little go. So I did come across your work, Brother Gregory, through one of Mark's videos on YouTube, and it basically was the culmination of everything that I'd been searching for in terms of answers about what the kingdom of God actually meant. I also had, as a believer, I had questions. Well, what did Romans 13 mean? Because I was brought up in the mainstream churchianity, basically, as you've said many times before. It's taught that we're meant to submit to the civil authorities, but when I saw your explanation of that and also Mark's, it just made a lot of sense, and a lot of pieces fell together for me. And I've just been listening to a lot of your audios and a lot of the information on your websites, and it's been very good.
So you say mainstream Christianity. What kind of a background is your mainstream Christianity?
Well, actually, I was really, really only a part of it for, I guess, until I was from birth until maybe 12 or 13 years old in, I guess, Church of England or Anglican. And but the biggest impression for me through those young years was my mother virtually didn't talk at all about her faith, but I was just watching her as children do, and that made a massive impression on my faith. And also, I think probably the women in the church school that were teaching us as kids, teaching us the gospel stories and so forth. But I did something that I find quite interesting is the fact that when I was 7 or 8 years old in that church school, I was given we're all given a book, and there are a series of books for children with pictures and so forth. But I'm going to just I'll show you what the book looks like, and that's the book that I was given, and
I can't quite read the title on my screen. What's that?
it says Jesus and the Pharisees, and
Okay.
there's a picture of him holding the rope, the whips there. But anyway, I guess my point is, and I went away from my faith for a long time as well too, in my 20s and 30s, but I'm 47 now, and I started coming back to the faith, I guess, 10 years ago. But just had a real sense that what was being taught in the churches was drastically missing the mark. So yeah, I did similar searching to, I guess, most people through common law and constitutions and, you know, sovereign citizen and all of that kind of stuff. But I agree with Darin. It's just all it's a minefield, and I knew things had to be more simple than that, because I did feel that I knew some of the spirit of what Jesus Christ was teaching, and that's where, once again, coming to your work and Mark's, it really just was quite a revelation and a real. Once I got into the work and the information that you're putting out there, the emphasis on certain elements, it's been a real weight off my shoulders to find what the kingdom of God actually is, and the implications of what the perfect law of liberty actually mean for us as individuals and as you know, as a body of people.
Yeah, the role of religion. This is the thing. There's so many different aspects. You know, it's like I come up on everybody putting this puzzle together, and they're hammering pieces into place. I guess they don't quite fit.
Yes.
And you know, when I started this journey when I was like 7 years old, and then it seemed like somebody else was orchestrating where I was going to be and what I was going to learn. You know, I went away to the seminary when I was 13 years old to study to be a priest, but it wasn't in the Roman rite. It was in the Carmelite rite, which was the last rite to submit to the Pope. It ended up that there were people there at the seminary that I was at that was very, very small seminary. There's only like 66 guys being students in this seminary from freshman year to senior year. But we went to classes down at a big, huge seminary that had like, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 students. But the priests that were up at where I was dealing with were all missionaries. They'd been captured by the communist Chinese. They'd been tortured. They'd been, you know, kind of a rough house Christianity that, you know, they weren't sitting in some diocese having everybody come and see them. And they came to confront some of the essential facts of life the hard way. And they had a completely different vision. I mean, the first person that told me that the Roman Church was not the one true church was an archbishop in the Roman Church. That was put in my path. I didn't go out seeking him. Not only was he put in my path, he went looking for me, the first conversation that we had. And I had this sense that there were other things that were going on in my life that were orchestrating that I would meet this person or meet that person. They'd tell me stuff. And then sometimes somebody would tell me something I'd know it was important. And I was very autistic in some ways. I shouldn't say autistic. That would be a misnomer. But I was very dyslexic. I wasn't really good in school. I saw things more in pictures than in words. I saw patterns where other people didn't see patterns, because I wasn't distracted by what they saw, because I didn't see what they saw. But it felt like somebody was teaching me. I didn't realize it at the time, but my life was teaching me. I was being put in these places, and things that I would see was important. I wouldn't know how important they were for another 30 years maybe, or 20 years, or sometimes it was 10 minutes later. And the pieces were being put together for me, where I finally ended up here on the desert herding sheep, which is what I wanted to do when I was 7 years old. Big long story I've told somewhere in the videos and audios. But things didn't really start gelling till I knelt down on the desert and said, I can't figure it out. I knew there was something wrong, like you were saying, Darin, something's wrong. But it was when I admitted I couldn't figure it out that just things started coming. I mean, books showed up, people showed up. I'm out in the middle of the desert. I mean, we're way out. People say, well, I know where this is. I know where that is. Where are you? Well, we're beyond the boonies. And and those people came to me. I mean, like I say, law books showed up on my front step, stacked 2.5 feet tall. And like, I'm not looking for law books. Where they come from? But I would literally, somebody would send me a book and I would fan through it, and all of a sudden a page would catch my eye, and I'd open that page and I would see a paragraph and read a paragraph, and that might be the only thing of value in that book. And then it ended up in the books that I wrote. So I have this sense always that there's something else orchestrating our lives if we let it.
Yes.
But we only let it if we have those things that Christ talked about: humility, patience, forgiveness for other people. When then, like you say, forgiveness. Does that mean I tolerate a fool? No. I forgive him, but I will tell him he's a fool, or I will show him he's a fool if God leads me to do that. But I think God is leading us all the time. But he's, according to the prophets, the way God leads you is through a still small voice. He doesn't shout at you. He doesn't make you. He doesn't twist your arm. He doesn't use a cattle prod. It wasn't until yesterday that we had our first cattle prod brought onto the property. But we haven't used it on anybody. I told the person who was leaving, I said, just don't give it to my wife. But that's, of course, the joke. But the reality is that most people won't let this truth lead them. That they want to have the truth, possess the truth, hold the truth. The first thing you do when you find the truth is you want to share it with somebody else. It's just hard to find people who are willing to share truth with you. But anyway, let's go back to you, Darin, and we'll go around again. I need to find out where the clock is here, so I keep track of need to put a clock up. My grandson set up all these windows, and I don't know where the clock is, but we don't want to go too long. But anyway, he's got a watch. Oh, wow. I haven't seen a watch in a long time. So anyway, you wanted where you're coming from, and you kind of got up to where you were first discovering us, and how you did these things that were out of your normal sphere of comfort, I guess you say, and kind of joined the network, whatever that means. It's just a place to come together. You don't have to sign over anything. It's not a contractual agreement. And it's amazing. You start out common law, contracts, all this kind of covenants. One of the very first commandments is not to make those. Not to make contracts, covenants. And one of the things that few times where Jesus actually said, do this or don't do that, he says, stop the taking of oaths, or James actually said, above all else, stop the taking of oaths. Yet everybody does it. They're all taking oaths. They're all swearing. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. depending on whose commandments you're reading, statements, the 10 statements, uh, coveting gets 2 commandment numbers, 9 and 10. But nobody can tell me that everybody isn't coveting their neighbor's goods through these social welfare programs. I did a whole show on social welfare when it was brought to Australia, which was just a little bit after they brought the Federal Reserve to Australia. You guys were ahead of us on...
Earlier here. we were the first, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. That's the first I can recall.
Yeah, 1890s. And I've grown up and always believing in that. And it's, you know, although I never believed in government, I like, you know, you're sort of caught these two worlds often. And a lot of people like that. It's like, so I talk about needing to, I mean, I'm not telling you I'm out of the system by any means. I'm very much part of it in the physical. But I think this move mentally out first is what's so hard.
Absolutely. That's what you see in Egypt when they were leaving Egypt. I always wondered this. Okay, God sends Moses, supposedly, to get the people out of Egypt. But then he hardens the heart of the Pharaoh, so he won't let them go? What's that all about? Well, it didn't make any sense when I was a kid, but then now I see, because they weren't ready for freedom. They wouldn't know how to be free. Absolutely. They had to suffer without the benefits for a period of time during hard times, just to get up to speed enough to walk out the door. And they weren't. Yeah.
I see the same process now.
Yeah.
I see the same process happening now where people say they want freedom. And I say I want freedom, but we're not ready for it. And I am definitely not ready for it either. Because we don't, I mean, I think I understand what it means, which is a difference perhaps for me and some other people. But they talk about gleaning in the fields at night. I see that's our process now. Before we get kicked out, because I see we're going to get kicked out. Well, we're going to be given a choice in the whole way or out. I think that will be what's coming.
I think we're going to be spit out. I think that's the kind of the way. It's because we don't have the promised land to go to. There's no. This is a world system. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, there's similarities to those times, but each time obviously is a bit different. And I think this is the exact thing you're talking about. It's the thing I find the hardest is a couple of things here: the covenants, contracts, and the constitutions. I deal with people who are literally trying to write constitutions. I'll talk to them, and then they're yeah, and then off they go to try and write a constitution. I said, but you getting the idea that no, you can't have any rules to control other people's behaviour and try to guarantee what they will do. Because the minute you do that, you're now just binding yourselves in them. By trying to bind them, you're binding yourself. And that's the sort of these subtle traps that we're trained to fall into, and we're so used to, we just keep falling back into. Oh yeah, well, okay, we do this, but we just have to make sure we have these 3 key rules that'll make sure that no one misbehaves. And it's like, no, you can't actually do that because you just made a rule. Any one rule is going to be enough, the way I look at it. It doesn't matter if you've got one golden rule. That one golden rule will now take away your freedom. And once you take away the freedom, you go down that inevitable path. You know, you add control. Eventually, you get control freaks, and you band it back in tyranny. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, see, I'm coming at that same premise that you're saying, and I can understand it because, like, you're trying to put it into words, and you're saying you can't have a rule, and what you're talking about is establish a legal system. That would be another way of wording the same thing. But the reality is like people say, well, don't you want abortion outlawed? And I say, it is outlawed. It's not lawful to murder the child growing in your womb. That's just not lawful. But do I want to turn over the power to a legal system to enforce that? No. Because now I'm giving power to other individuals to make choices for you. I am pro-choice, but I am pro you choosing life, not murder or death or destruction. I mean, that goes back to the very first commandment, which we're to love God. Well, what is God? You know, who is he, she, it, God? It's something that created a universe that is actually functioning. And I mean, you go everywhere on this planet and there is life everywhere. When we look out into the stars, we don't see the same kind of life on the moon that we see here. We don't see a lot of things when we look out there, but there you can go almost anywhere. You can go to the way below the sands in the desert, and there's life. At the bottom of the ocean, you'll find life. In the middle of the Arctic, there's like pink algae growing in the solid ice. Where's all this life coming from? So to me, that life is sacred. Yet I will butcher a cow or a sheep and eat it. But the only reason there's a herd is because I've already stayed up all night to make sure that they survive. So that's that side. To love life. I love the life, but I know that if I give the power to the government to regulate everybody's body, they'll be injecting them with poisons before the day is out. Because I can also see this. Yeah, I can see the spirit of anybody who wants to make rules for everybody else. The rules are there. And this is what I approached this just recently in the show again. I've got shows way back. I don't even like calling the 10 Commandments 10 Commandments, because the word there that they translate into commandments doesn't actually mean commandments. They're not 10 laws. Torah is the word for law. And then they have another word that they translate statutes. It's completely different. But, that's the difference between legal systems. Go ahead.
Sorry. This brings me a bit of a question, or at least how I will explain how I see it. I mean, you talk about almost cause and effect. Now, what I'm saying is how I see it, and you may correct me if you think I'm wrong, but when we start trying to make rules for each other, we start binding each other, we lose our freedom. But people often come up with how we're going to deal with the problem. If somebody commits a murder, rape, whatever, or less than crime, I think, well, the way I'm seeing it is you have principles, and you can break them down to two very simple principles. Have no man father. The only authority is that which is whatever you want to call it, and care about your neighbour as much as yourself. And from those principles, it seems to me that when you have come over a problem, you've got the ability to be flexible. That's the difference between a living thing and a written in stone or written in paper or legal system. Now you can deal with the situation, coming back to simple principles of, obviously if it's a transgression of someone, do you care about someone as much as yourself? And maybe there's obvious things that come from that. Obviously a murder's not doing that. Obviously stealing from someone's not doing that. But that allows you the flexibility as individuals or as a group to decide what, how these principles are going to be applied, because that may involve mercy. Okay, yeah, they broke it, but, it was no harm, no foul, really, with an unintentional, as opposed to rules and regulations where it's like, well, that's the line, end of, and you're now bound to that. That for a lot of people, I think is quite that maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but that's my understanding. It's that you're not going to have boundaries in life. It's not that you aren't going to have to draw the line now and then, like taking the cow, killing the cow to eat it, but that you're not doing it in this inflexible, set way. That takes away your freedom. It's that sort of. Do you think that's on path? Is how you relate to it?
Yeah, if you're. Christ said, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you live by coveting your neighbor's goods, your goods will be coveted by your neighbor. And there's a lot more of your neighbors than there are of you. If you send men to your neighbor's house to force your neighbor to contribute to what you want for free, that's not love. And it doesn't take rocket science to figure that out. But you mention that to most of the people out there, and you mean like, I can't have Social Security, I can't have free education, I can't get my student loans paid for. They live in darkness. What you're trying to do is bring light where there's darkness, and they will hate that light. But what you're looking for is the people who are willing to blink and open their eyes and ponder it and go down the same, this is you throw your seeds out and some fall where they're not going to germinate, and some, the birds eat them up. Some, those are all metaphors for the same thing that you're dealing with. no matter how well I've actually walked through acres and acres of field casting seed like the old days. And when we came here, we did everything the old way. You castrate lambs with your teeth. That's the way the shepherds did it for 1,000 years. It sounds terrible, but it's not so bad. And we used to joke that whoever does it gets a free Coke. But now we use the elastrator. But we know how to do the old ways and why they did it. And we learned that by going through those operations and those, we didn't have any power when we came here. And we may end up in tents before we're done. that's another joke we said. Well, we don't know what's going to happen, but it will probably be intense. And of course, you can spell that two different ways. But I've been at this long enough that I can't go any other way. I have to go this way. And I'm just looking for other people that want to go that way. I don't need the other people to reassure me. My faith doesn't come because we're all getting together and glad handing each other and patting each other on the back. But when I began to see these things and tell them to other people, they said that I was so depressing. And I thought, how could I be depressing? I was, I could see on the look on your face. You're just going what? You're finally seeing the truth. The puzzle's finally coming together. Something's starting to make some sense. Why are you depressed? Because they have to let go of what they don't want to let go of. But what's happening now in the world, you were talking about freedom and all this stuff. They don't know how to be free. They think they are free. Now, most people think they are free. They're beginning to realize that. Say again?
I was going to say, some people say no, they aren't free, but they think they can just declare themselves free.
Yeah.
That we really, yeah.
If you won't free other people, see that cause and effect works both ways. If you won't free other people from your desire to make their constitution, you're not going to be free. The way you set yourself free is you set the captives free. You're willing to sacrifice your own time, your own energy, so that other people can be free. This is from the dawn of time. You have children so that they will be free, so that they will have life. You know that you got, 60, 70, 80 years, maybe 100 years. But you're raising children to pass that life on to the next generation, being a herdsman of cattle and sheep. I watch the cows. They know they are living for the next generation, to give life to the next generation. This cow that was, literally laying out flat, almost dead and everything. We finally got her up through a long series of events and stuff. And she's walking around, but we had her calf locked away. She could see it, but it was on the other side of these barred fence, because we were afraid she would stumble and fall on it and crush it. And because it's just newborn. And so she was walking around, and her feet were stable, and I let the calf out. She just came alive when she saw her calf, walking around, jumping around, butting on her, because now she had purpose. Cows have to have purpose. It's built in from algae to fungus to everything. It's a pattern in this thing we call life. And if people were familiar with that and living according to that and seeing that and enmeshed in that and realizing that there can be no life without sacrifice. But the sacrifice has to be free will. You can't force it. You can't force your neighbor to twist his arm. Well, now's the time to contribute. If you do that,
now it's time to be free.
Yeah, you're not going to be free if you're going to force people. And if you go out and say, well, all I have to do is fill out these papers and I can go out and be free, then you don't care about anybody else but you. And guess what? Nobody else is going to care about you. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I do have visions of things and stuff like that. They don't scare me, Not that they aren't scary, but the reality is uh, it's your journey that's important to you, and your journey has to be important to me for my journey to take the next step. And this is what the Israelites were learning. They had been in a socialist state for 400 years, which weakened them as a people. But because they were being oppressed to some degree, some of them were starting to wake up. And now was coming these plagues, and some of their plagues were actual real plagues. But our plagues are injected into our lives. Well, you hear what I said? Our plagues have been injected into our lives. So that there may be a real plague here, but where did it come from? But the reality is they had to go through that, and everybody didn't wake up. Everybody didn't get it. But enough of them get. If we could get 5% of Australia or New Zealand to actually come together with that spirit of willing to lay down their life for their fellow man because they consider their fellow man as important as them, you will turn the whole world around. The whole world around you around. Not you.
If we could get 0.1%.
That would make a difference. Yeah.
No, but I think what I find, before we get back to Loudon, is what I see is that there's a certain, like, for some people, it's like you have, like, maybe us unfortunate ones can say, hey, I can see how this is done without seeing it in the flesh. I can see this working. Well, you need enough people to get it going. But once you get some kind of example, then people who can see that embryonic example, there's a few more people who can see, maybe this would work. And each sort of layer of people who need to actually see more of it in reality, come on later and later and later. It's just getting enough of that initial group of people who can see it in the metaphysical, shall we say, without actually physically seeing it. That's where I think is the initial hurdle.
Yeah, see, we're spiritual creatures somewhere inside all this flesh, but people say, well, prove it. Well, I see it. If you don't see it, that's okay. When we talk about living in darkness, sitting in darkness, that's what they said in the New Testament, that when Jesus came, the people were sitting in darkness. And he uses the metaphor that he was the light. And the reality is that what you are beginning to realize in your own mind and heart, because I don't think it's just in your mind, and you're willing to take steps along those lines, that you actually will bring light into the room before you even open your mouth. And the more you bring that light into the room, the more people who love the darkness will sense it, and they will not like you. They don't know why they don't like you, but they will not like you. But there's going to be one guy in 10 or 50 that you'll like be drawn to each other. And you're not drawn to each other because you need each other, but because you actually have something in common. And I believe that once people start not only seeing the truth, but acting upon it in sometimes little tiny ways that don't even seem to be important, that you're magnifying that light, and it will start to go on in other people. I think a lot of people, the light will go on in them. They may not be able to ever talk about it, but they'll still be able to bring the light into the room. That may not be their skill to talk. I mean, our skills are often our curses. What we're really good at becomes a burden really quick. But we accept that. But ultimately, everybody's got to have these common denominators of humility, although we may not seem humble to other people. But and forgiveness and tolerance, and willing to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and maybe sticks and stones that are thrown at us, verbally or otherwise. That's okay. But it's really an adventure, and it's like coming out of, you can't drain the swamp if you are the swamp. You have to You have to rise above that. That's what I was raised until I was 13. I was raised on the bayous of Houston, Texas. I mean, I know the swamp. But, I see all these things around us as metaphors for this spiritual reality that is actually flowing through us and this physical world. And that's where the common denominators, that's where the principles keep popping up. But you said we'd go to Loudon, unless you had something else to really add. Let's go to Loudon, see if he has anything
Okay,
else.
Loudon.
Yeah, good one, guys. Well, I'll just change the subject just a little bit, but it's obviously related to the kingdom. So, in my late teens, I was in the military, and I just only did 4 or 5 years of service. And then after that, I went on a bit of a search, and I ended up studying Chinese martial arts, and then I went on to study Chinese medicine at university. And but what I find interesting is that, and not that I'm an expert on ancient Chinese pictograms, but a lot of and I think, Brother Gregory, you've spoken about this before on your audios as well, but some of the pictograms allude to the Genesis story and so forth in the Chinese characters. But there's 2 little quotes I just wanted to read, or sayings, sort of semi-famous sayings from around 2,000 years ago in China, which relates to the topic that we're talking about of charitable giving and loving your neighbour. So one of them is, to have virtuous people who are kind to their neighbours. This is a precious treasure for a country. And secondly, to help those who are suffering difficulties and to have sympathy for our neighbours. This is following the way. Those who follow the way will be blessed. So I found that interesting. And
was that a particular, you said that's Chinese, was that connected to a particular Chinese religion? I hate to use the word religion, but...
Yeah, sure.
Was that Taoist, or...?
Sure. Yes, it would be Taoist back then for sure. And from my understanding, the interesting thing about Chinese culture from thousands of years ago until just before the Communist Revolution was that there was a very active system of charitable giving within the society, relating to food for poor people, and also a medical system whereby the esteemed doctors within every province and in every town were basically, they were I can't think of the correct word now, but they were looked after by the elite class within that province. So the elites and the higher level officials and so forth that were more wealthy, or the merchants and the landowners and so forth, they would pay the doctors handsomely for their medical services, and to give them, because obviously the Chinese doctors were also, a lot of them were astrologers but anyway, so getting to the point, the wealthy class would pay the doctors handsomely, and thereby, from what I've learned about how their charitable system worked, was then the doctors would freely give medical service to the peasants and the farmers and so forth for very small cost or zero cost. So that was a system of love and charity that wasn't it wasn't enshrined in their government systems or anything like that. It was just a organic system of charitable giving and love and support that was happening in China for thousands of years. And that really is essentially what you put a lot of focus on, that model, Brother Gregory, and obviously also that's what Jesus Christ was talking about.
Right. I'm working on a series right now, and it's showing up in our page at Preparing You on capitalism, because I see so many people that think they're Christians defaming capitalism, but of course it's defined like a dozen different ways. But originally capitalism was simply you were in control of the means of production, which 99% of that is your labor. Your labor belonged to you. What you did with your life belonged to you. Once you had satisfied taking care of your parents, now your labor was yours. And that's capitalism. That's total. It's not a system. It's not really even an ism by most definitions of ism. It's just you have a right to your life and your liberty in pursuit of happiness. You can put it in those terms. But then people comes along with, corporate capitalism and political capitalism and debt capitalism, which aren't even really capitalism. I mean, we haven't had capitalism in the United States, and I know you haven't had it in Australia or New Zealand for 100 years. You can't have capitalism if you don't have any capital, and their notes aren't capital. So the reality is, if I go back and I look at the Taoists and the Buddhists and even Confucius and these different guys, you'll see this pattern of where you have to care about others as much as you care about yourself, their rights, their life, everything. And when we stray from that, which of course America is doing gangbusters, and so is most other countries in the world, or this whole COVID thing would have never taken place if we all really cared about one another as much as we care about ourselves. Yeah. It wouldn't have had anything to grip onto. It wouldn't have. There'd been no push of fear. Everybody would have just seen it for what it was. But they all have moved into darkness because they don't want to admit that they don't care about their neighbor as much as they care about themselves and what they want. That's what drove this whole thing. Till we get back to that, those principles. You look at the Chinese history where those principles became pushed and society became successful, and then they got away from it, and then society began to decay. And so, people try to lump, like Chinese history into Chinese history. I mean, it's ridiculous. You're talking about millions of people over thousands of years, and they're doing all kinds of different things. They're not all the same. They're not all thinking the same. But if we can get back to these basic principles, why I brought up capitalism is that they think under capitalism, it centralizes wealth. That's what they are intimating. And the rich become richer and richer and richer because they're the rich. And they got more money to invest, and then they become richer and richer, and the poor just eke by. Well, if you have an immoral society, that's absolutely what will take place. But if you have a moral society, whatever morals are, we have to do, that would be take another show. But the rich are not your enemy. I mean, this is the whole thing's like Passover. They think it's about the lamb. Passover is about 10 families got together in somebody's house, probably the rich guy's house, because it was big enough to hold everybody. They all cook a lamb together. They all eat the lamb together. They all stay in the house all night together. Because the rich man needed the poor man as much as the poor man needed the rich man. The rich man probably is a better organizer. Maybe his parents, he inherited more because his parents were very frugal and thrifty or smarter or whatever. But he isn't going to keep his wealth unless all the other people around about him care about him. So he has to care about them if he wants them to care about him. If you don't have to do that in a democracy. You don't have to do that in, I don't know, name several other different forms of government. But in a pure republic where the leaders are only titular and you're just all coming together, what's binding your society together? And this is one of the things you've heard me mention recently. Dr. Malone said it, that we live in a sick society and we have to recreate the social bonds of society. Well, what we have to do is recreate the social bonds of a free society. We have to care about the rich man as much as the rich man needs to care about us, because he's not going to be able to keep his wealth if he doesn't have. Nobody's going to lay down their life for him, or risk their life for him if he doesn't care about them. Unfortunately, what we have today is people are, patriots are going out risking their lives for the United States. They're not thinking this thing through. They're not. Their country is enslaving them. This whole movement towards hate guys like Jefferson and Washington because they were slave owners. Anybody taking Social Security, social welfare, they're slave owners. You're either enslaving your neighbor right now, or you're enslaving the children of your neighbor in the future because you're borrowing money to get your free benefits now. Everybody who believes in socialism believes in slavery because they want to enslave everybody else so that they can have their free stuff. That's going to end badly. That's all there is to it. So people who want to change, they have to change. Go ahead. I see you wanting to speak, Darin.
I always want to speak. I think a lot of what with people though, like there's a lot of desperation, and they cling to what they know. And at a time when we're being challenged to let go of what we think we know and move into a whole different system, which in a way is what the New Age is selling. It's just kind of crazy, but that's another psyop.
It's the metaphor of Peter stepping out of the boat. Peter's going to step out of the boat. He knows the boat.
A lot of people in these desperate times, unfortunately, I can equate it a bit like a sinking ship. The ship's going down. You've got to jump off the ship and try and maybe you can get into a lifeboat. Maybe you can find a bit of wreckage, and ideally find some, work together with some other people to do it. But as an individual, you've got to jump off the boat. If you cling to the boat and hope to be saved, you're going down with the boat.
Yeah.
Now, jumping off may not save you either, but it's your only chance. And I think for a lot of people in their desperation, instead of saying, you know what, I've got to go and take my chances out there and let go, they and be open to finding this new thing and saving themselves, whatever, they're clinging to the wreckage and going down with it. And
the spirit of what you're saying, you said this at the beginning of the show, so we've gone full circle, is that you have to do this in your head first. And then you have to do it in your heart first. You have to let go of all those things that make you feel secure in your head that you thought were true and are not panning out. And then you have to turn it into action through the spirit that lives in you. If you're in a big ship and it goes down, everybody who's a sailor, and I've been a sailor, you want to get away from that ship because it's like a giant toilet flushing as that goes down, because the vacuum that it's taking with it is going to suck you. I don't care how good a swimmer you are, you're going to get sucked down with the ship. And then I've also told the story of a guy who's clinging to wreckage. He survived. He's got the wreckage, and now a lifeboat comes. He won't let go of the wreckage to get into the lifeboat because the wreckage has become his security. Well, that's modern religion. They won't let go of their beliefs. People are shocked when they said, well, if we join your church, which you can't really join my church, you can walk with us. But is somebody out there to get that?
I can get it.
Thank you. But this idea of I actually lost my train of thought there for a second, but you have to be willing to let go of these things and it's a good idea to start letting go. And that's why we created the website, Preparing You, His Holy Church. And you guys mentioned two completely different things that you caught your attention. But we're giving you information, not because the tree of knowledge has the answer, but the real knowledge of what has gone on that has given you the beliefs that you have that just ain't so, you have to let go of. And so people feel like I'm attacking their delusion. I'm just bringing light into their room, and you're finding out the kitty you've been petting is a lion that is hungry to bite your head off. So there's a metaphor for you. And you realize, you're petting a spider, you're petting a monster. But the reason you're subject to it is you've been biting one another for 100 years in America. And now you're devoured and you're wondering why. So there is a solution, there is a way, and that's what in this series on banking, which is what we're doing now, and this capitalism one that I'm preparing, I'm going to show you, hopefully I'm going to show people, and I just put together the way out. And there is a way out, but you have to get something out of you first, the guys who are looking for the perfect congregation of saints that he wants to join. So because he doesn't want to be with all these sinners, he wants to be with saints. I says, if you found a congregation of saints, what makes you think they're going to let you in? Unless you already imagine yourself a saint. I'm not a saint. This is what.
Definitely not.
Well, we don't want to get into that. Well, I'll take your word for it.
I didn't really like that.
We got Loudon smiling. No, so anyway, it's been an interesting conversation. I think we ought to maybe do it again, and we'll take a look at it. And so I'll let you guys have the last word. I won't time you because I don't want to make up a rule that you only have 30 seconds or whatever. But if you have anything you want to sign off with, I won't necessarily take the last word. I'll start with you, Darin. Do you have anything?
No, it seems a good point to conclude. But isn't this the point? Like, when you got a YouTube channel, you meant to plug it or something? Like, is that what I do now?
Well, you can. Well, you're in.
I was going to say.
You're in New Zealand, right?
That's why. That's why I called relating to what you said. That's why when I had to come up with a name for a channel, I called it "Question Everything, Including Yourself," because I think that's kind of what we need to be doing now.
Right.
It isn't just an external thing; it's also got to be an internal thing because, just exactly what you're saying. You're not. None of us are a finished package, and I don't believe any of us are probably. I mean, we're at different stages, but I don't think any of us are really ready to just grab this. It is a process. It is something we're all going to have to make changes and adapt for. It's not just a case of clicking your fingers and going across. Yeah,
adapt or die, and that an old saying. I think that's a law somewhere. So anyway, Loudon, did you have something that you want to put in for the last bit?
No, not really, but just thanks, Brother Gregory, for everything, and thanks also, Darin.
Okay. Well, thank you both for coming on and giving us a shot at this, and hopefully we'll get better and start having more of this in the future. But so I'll say God bless, and may peace be with you.